Kia ora koutou e te whānau. Tēnei te mihi ki a koutou I tēnei maruahiahi. Talofa lava to our elected members, council staff, and most importantly, our community who are joining us via Skype. Ko te tūmanako, he pai te whakawhiti kōrero I wainga nui I a tātou. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Given the advent of COVID-19, we're in an unfamiliar space in terms of engaging with our community, kānohi ki te kānohi, face to face. Holding these events in this way is a first for us, so please bear with us if we experience any glitches this evening. I must say though, tonight's format will help us rethink how we host dialogue with our community and how we come together to deliberate on challenges, issues, and opportunities before us. Questions asked during registration, during the session or afterwards will be posted on the council website within 5 days, along with the responses. Our session this evening will take approximately 90 minutes. It'll be recorded and also made available on the website. Please be aware that tonight is not a feedback session. Details on how you can submit your feedback will be given at the end of this presentation. Tonight is a conversation about a crisis that cannot be responded to in a business as usual kind of a way. A conversation about what the future of Tāmaki Makaurau looks like given the hit to Auckland Council's revenues by COVID-19, a figure that stands at more than $500 million, the highest in the city's history. This conversation provides you, our community, with an opportunity to ask questions of our councillors who are responsible for making decisions at a regional level. This conversation will also help you with a chance to hear from our subject matter experts who I will introduce momentarily. Community, you're encouraged to express your views in order to ensure you have all the necessary information to make an informed submission. So bear in mind, tonight isn't about reaching consensus with those around the virtual table. So community and elected members alike, please be respectful during our conversation. Following this event, notes will be themed, grouped and reported back to our elected members to inform their decision making. These notes will also be circulated to everyone in attendance. So please make sure you've provided us with your email address. Our format this evening is light and informal. It's a conversation. And so in a moment, I'll ask the elected members to introduce themselves and make a brief comment about what they'd like to get out of tonight's conversation before handing it over to our financial subject matter experts and then on to our question and answer session. Let's begin with Bill. Bill, care to share a few thoughts or make a brief comment?
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen and staff, fellow councillors and local board members. This is the first, isn't it? So a webinar to get, as I have you say, which is great. And as Eddie has already alluded to, these are unprecedented times, not only for this council, but for this country. And we are facing gigantic waves of financial pressure, both individually and collectively. And I encourage you to be involved in this process so we get an outcome that's as inclusive as possible for all Aucklanders. Thanks.
Thank you, Bill. I'm now going to take the opportunity. I can see Councillor Cooper. Linda, would you care to offer any thoughts or make a brief comment before we delve into a presentation from our subject matter experts?
Well, kia ora koutou, everybody. You're welcome to this webinar. This is quite exciting for us. We haven't done this way before and reached out to people, but as councillors and mayor and councillors, we felt we really had to come back to you and talk about the changes we have to make, and we're really looking forward to having this conversation with you and hearing your questions and answering you the best we can. Thank you.
Kia ora, Linda. Tracy, any thoughts or a brief comment before we go through the subject matter expert presentation?
Oh, kia ora tātou to all. Thank you for the opportunity to be involved in this, and I'm very grateful that we have this chance to hear from our community, to answer questions. In the beginning, Eddie, you asked us what we'd like to get out tonight, and what I'd like to get out of tonight is to hear your views and your opinions about this emergency budget. It is unprecedented times, and I acknowledge the councillors and local board members that are involved. I acknowledge our Deputy Mayor One of the things that's critical to me is to listen to you, to hear what you have to say and to answer questions. And so I've also been very pleased that we have this opportunity, given the environment that we are in, because it is our duty to serve you, the ratepayers and the residents of this fabulous Tamaki Makaurau. Thank you.
Whaafetai lava, Tracy. Councillor Henderson. We might just come back to Councillor Shane Henderson. What we're going to do now is we're going to set the scene, and we're going to hear from our subject matter experts who are joining us this evening. So momentarily, when we're all set up, and again, just another plug, ladies and gentlemen, if you could bear with us. It's the first time we've done it this way, so there will be glitches, and well, hopefully not too many, but there might be the odd delay. That's just so we can perfect it and make sure that everything's projecting and that you can hear everything as should. So right now, I'd like to hand it across to our subject matter experts who are in the room, who will introduce themselves and take you through tonight's presentation. Whaafetai.
Good evening, I'm Andrew Duncan. I'm the Manager of Financial Policy at Auckland Council.
And good evening, my name is David Gurney. I am the Manager of Corporate and Local Board Performance at Auckland Council.
David and I, happy to answer your questions this evening. And I'll start off by a quick recap of where we've been so far this year. Back in February, before the world was hit by COVID-19, and New Zealand in particular, we talked with you about our annual budget. And many of you who are listening today will have contributed to that. We've listened to your feedback. And those proposals have been considered by the governing body already. However, the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic mean that we're living in a much changed world. Big differences to the financial and economic environment, and we're facing a major revenue shortfall, over $500 million. Now, usually we do one budget process, but this is not business as usual. And the budget that sits under the umbrella of all the broader planning that we've undertaken with you over the years now has to be revisited in the light of the new circumstances. So we've been substantially affected by COVID-19. Our financial circumstances are quite different. More than half of our revenue comes from rates, but more than half of it comes from other sources. And border closures and restrictions on gathering, so we're getting a lot less money from conventions, concerts, visits to the zoo. 30 million down in our revenue from pools and leisure centres, holiday parks. 40 million less in transport fares as we've had shut down of our public transport and much lower use. Our regional fuel tax receipts are down by 40 million. And parking and enforcement, similar levels. We're not going to be getting our dividend of 60 million from Auckland Airport. Drops 60 million from Ports of Auckland revenue. Losing building and resource consent development contribution revenue as well as building activity slows down. And the developers facing the uncertainty as to whether their projects can successfully proceed. We've also got less revenue from our water sales, which have also been affected by the drought. We're looking at Watercare's revenue dropping 75 million. So we've got some tough decisions to make, and that all adds up to $525 million. So with this big reduction in revenue, we've still got very high fixed costs and less cash to pay for services and investments. We're also very close to what we can reasonably borrow. And our debt to revenue ratios very close to their limits. So we've given ourselves a debt to revenue ratio of 270%, which means we can't go more than $2.70 for each dollar of revenue. So in this space, with our revenue falling, it means we'd undoubtedly be breaching our debt ratios. We're already investing heavily in the region. We've made commitments to that extent. That's one of the reasons we're already up around that limit. We've got a growing region that needs more investment. You would have heard about that in the past and see the evidence yourself over the years. We've been investing to support that, but that investment's taken us to the limit. So confronted with these challenges, the Council's got 4 levers we can use to put us in a stable financial position going into the future. It's important that we remain financially prudent, that our borrowing's set at appropriate levels, and that we endeavour to cover our expenditure with our revenue. So in looking at how we can manage to achieve those things with the greatly reduced revenue we're facing this year, there are 4 levers we can pull to get the Council into that position now and into the future for the community. We can increase our borrowing, but were we to do that, given that we're already very close to our limits, that would see our borrowing costs rise. We'd have lower access to debt markets, and we would have less capacity to address any future shocks, such as the current drought. It would also raise the burden on future ratepayers. We can reduce our capital investment, and this would mean slowing down, deferring, or setting aside some of our capital projects. So that's looking at things like building community facilities, roads, and infrastructure as water pipes and such as water pipes and flood defences. We've already decided to defer some capital expenditure. We'll need to look at deferring more. We can reduce our operating expenditure. The Council's already made a pretty substantial commitment in that space before the impacts of COVID-19 became apparent. We're going to have to increase those efforts to make savings in what we do, but we're also going to have to look at the level of services we provide across the city. We've got voluntary reductions in staff pay, savings in interest payments, but there'll also be staff reductions and reducing maintenance of some of our facilities and lowering our utilities costs. We're also going to have to look at the over $50 billion of assets we own and think about recycling some of those, letting go of more of our least well-used assets so that we can help pay for new ones and keep running those that are providing the best services to the community. So in that space, and with those levers, we've got 3 things that we're consulting on this year. We're looking at either a 3.5 or a 2.5% general rates increase. Now, our long-term plan provided for a 3.5% rates increase for this year. We're now going to also put in front of you an option for a 2.5% increase. Both of these will require us to make some changes in the space of those 4 levers we talked about earlier. They'll have them, and the 2.5% one having more substantial effects on our debt, employment, and business activity in Auckland. We're also looking to offer ratepayers the opportunity to postpone the time at when they pay their rates to us. Many ratepayers are still going to be struggling financially. Giving them more time to pay their rates may help them get over that hurdle. And we're looking at suspending the accommodation provider rate and some of the spending associated with it for a year. So if we look at the general rates increase and what that means, rates are 40% of our over 40% of our revenue. We understand that many households are struggling financially. We're going to have to reduce or delay some of our service levels and capital projects at a 3.5% increase. That becomes much more substantial at a 2.5% level. How is that going to impact what the council does and the communities? So if we look at the 3.5%, it's $1.80 a week, or about $95 a year. $1.35 a week for the average value residential property at 2.5% and $70 a year. But for the first option, we're looking at pulling back capital expenditure to $2.3 billion from the 2.6, and that's a $280 million of projects deferred. There've been an increased level of deferrals at the 2.5% level. 3.5%, we look having us look at 54 million of savings in excess of those we're already planned for, and a high level of gain at 2.5%. So as ratepayers, those are weekly dollar amounts quite small for those rates increases. But for many people who've lost their jobs and been affected by COVID-19, rates are more of a challenge than those sums. And we recognise that. The council's allowed people ratepayers to defer their fourth quarter rates instalment on the basis that they pay that at the end of August with the first quarter instalment for next year. We've had over 6,000 ratepayers take up that opportunity so far. There's $20 million of rates deferred. But many of those ratepayers, and perhaps some additional ones, will be struggling when we get to that August time period. So we're proposing to introduce a new rates postponement scheme that would allow them to defer their rates for the 2021 year out into the next year, and to have then a year to pay that off. We're capping that at $20,000, so we can focus it on residential ratepayers and small to medium businesses. But those businesses and residential ratepayers will be able to carry forward part of their deferral from the fourth quarter as well. But this will mean that we'll be pushing that revenue further out, and in doing so, it'll have a further impact on our ability to undertake capital investment and provide services. Also in the rate space, we're looking at suspending the accommodation provider targeted rate and some of the spending. Now, we use the accommodation provider targeted rate. It's only paid by the owners of motels, hotels, and Airbnb type properties. And we use this to fund about half of the spending that Auckland Tourism, Events and Economic Development does to encourage major events and visitor attraction. But with travel restrictions in place at the moment, it's appropriate to pull back on that expenditure, as there's not going to be returns from it. However, we see this sort of expenditure as being very important for revitalising the tourism sector in the future. But in the meantime, while the expenditure is not being undertaken, we're proposing to suspend the accommodation provider targeted rate until the fourth quarter of next year, and to lower the amount we're planning to spend to about a quarter of what we would have spent otherwise. So, what happens next, Debbie?
Thank you for that, Andrew. There are two things that I want to address just before we address some questions to you, Andrew. There's quite a few here. The first thing is there's a question here that's been posed about removing the presentation from the centre of the screen. We'll absolutely do that. This was just for the subject matter expert presentation. The second thing is I've been asked, and my apologies, aroha mai, to introduce the councillors by full name and also maybe give where they're from, and I can absolutely do that. So you would have heard from Bill Cashmore, Deputy Mayor and Councillor for the Franklin Ward, Councillors Shane Henderson and Linda Cooper for the Waitakere Ward, Councillor Tracy Mulholland from the Faux Ward. There is a question here, Andrew, there's quite a few here, so I'll ask you two, and then I might come back to the other ones. The first question here is, A, who set the debt ratio? And B, if it was extended to 300%, what would that mean in terms of financial stability? So the first one is, who set the debt ratio? And secondly, if it were to be extended to 300%, what would it mean in terms of financial stability?
So the debt ratios are something the council establishes with the credit rating agencies. The council's got a AA credit rating, which we want to keep, and this maintains our rating and our reputation with the lenders. The proposal for the budget and looking at both next year and looking ahead does have us going slightly over our ratio to around 290% for 1 year, and then coming back into our range in the following year. If we were to go to 300, it would take away that little bit of leeway we have to allow us to manage for any further shocks we might face, and like the impacts that the droughts are having and the potential that we may need to commit some investment later this year into securing the water supply for Auckland if the drought continues.
The second part of that I've got here is, what would it mean to extend in terms of repayments and future plan? You might have already touched on it. So I might move on. At what debt ratio level is investment in future risks such as water, security and climate change? So I guess, and feel free to please chime in again if I've worded this badly, by not extending the debt ratio, what are the effects in all these other projects?
Yeah, so yeah, I'll have a go at answering that question. So I guess it comes down to the balancing act that Auckland Council needs to make between, there are 4 levers that I think we went through in the presentation. Debt is one of those things we can use, but we have to keep that debt level within prudent levels. As Andrew pointed out, with this new budget that we're proposing, our debt level will rise to 290% debt to revenue, and that's higher than we would target, but it's only a temporary thing. I guess we need to make sure it doesn't go too much beyond that, because we do need to, one, we need to future-proof us for any shocks that come, so Watercare's response to the drought is one of those. So it's very much a balancing act between the services we provide, what's important for us as a council, how to keep that debt within prudent levels, the capital investment that we need to make to keep. Okay, sure. Sorry about that. I'll start again.
Oh.
Okay. Now hopefully everyone can hear me. Yes? Yeah, so I have an answer. I'll have a go at answering that question. So it's all about balance, really, between the services that we want to provide, the debt levels that are prudent for us now and for our future generations. It's about the capital investment that we need to make in the city to keep the core infrastructure going, but also to provide some economic stimulus to the city as well. And also making sure that we keep our operational costs, appropriate, but as low as they can be. In terms of the impact of debt on important issues like climate change, core infrastructure, I guess we need to make sure that we have enough to spend on that stuff, but remember that we have to keep our debt within prudent limits. So in the current proposed budget, we will see that debt to revenue ratio increasing to about 290%, as Andrew outlined. That's higher than we target, so normally we would target to keep it below about 270%, but we feel that in the short term we need to do this to get us through some of the challenges that we currently face. At 290%, it allows us a little bit of leeway so that if any shocks come our way, for example, in regard to Watercare and their response to the drought, it gives us a little bit of headroom, but not much to respond to those. But it's all about balance, and that's why the feedback that everyone will provide to this budget is so important.
I can see another question slightly related to that. Someone's asked, given that interest rates are at a historic low, why is there a reluctance to borrow when finance has never been cheaper? Interest rates certainly are at a low, and the council's AA credit rating means that we can borrow very cheaply. However, we still are restricted by these limits that influence our credit rating, and certainly the interest rates we pay would rise. Along with that, the cost that we would incur as a result. So our reluctance to borrow is driven in part by the risk that poses, but also some of the other things that have been raised today about having to pay it back in the future and how it would affect our credit rating. And we certainly have included the benefits of lower interest rates in the budgets that you've got in front of you today.
Thank you for that. Linda Cooper.
Thank you. And I think we might just give Andrew a bit of a rest. He's been doing all the hard work at the moment. I think just to follow on from that, if the interest rates do go up, even though they are historically low, rates include a lot of interest. And if we're paying more interest, we're using less of your rates on services. And that's the balance we've tried to strike. We don't want to use your interest rate rise predominantly for interest. We want to use it for the services that are important to you. So that's another reason why you wouldn't want to be borrowing too much so that the interest rates go up, even though they are smaller.
Thank you for that. I've got a question here which I might direct in the direction of Bill Cashmore. Who chose which projects are proposed to get cut back or stopped?
So the final decision is made by the governing body of council with consultation with local boards. The projects, if they lie outside the gambit of the governing body, are with the CCOs like Auckland Transport and Watercare, and Panuku, of course, who has a lot of council property in its books. An exhaustive process is underway, and it is iterative, because what we don't know is just how bad this thing is going to get. And it is the $500 million plus enough, or are we going to have to cut harder? So what we've done is taken up a most likely scenario approach, and we put the ruler at that level and said, these are the things that we will put off for a year or two. Projects won't necessarily be stopped. They'll just be deferred for a year or maybe two, and then they'll come back onto the list, and we'll work through it. Should things improve, then we can move back more towards business as usual. But there's still a huge amount of uncertainty in what's going to happen in this country financially at this point in time. And the country's finances directly impact upon council's income through development contributions, connection fees for Watercare, and so forth. So The ultimate decision is the governing bodies, and we'll make that with expert advice and bearing in mind the prudence at all times. I'd like to comment very briefly about the credit limits. There's been a lot of talk around just borrowing more money around a lot of places in Auckland and nationwide, in fact. Councils and all institutions, like all businesses, are given credit limits by their banks, or in our case, it's by the international bond institutions. And working with Standard & Poor's and Moody's, councils have negotiated what is a prudent level of borrowing, and Andrew has mentioned that level of 270%. We will break that 270% this year for 1 year. If we broke it for more than 1 year, the banks could very easily increase our interest rates, is what Linda has talked about. But what is even more scary is they can actually make the money harder to get, or only have it available for a lot shorter time. And if we are going to rebuild Auckland and keep as much capital expenditure going and delivering projects that we need as a society, we need to have access to that long-term funding. These are the critical factors that have to be weighed up in the decision making about how far you take the debt, how much interest you pay, which is what Linda's talked about, and it's already substantial, and bearing the fact that some stage in the future, all of this debt does have to be paid back. It doesn't stop here or next week or next month. It does go on. So it's complicated, and it's a moving feast. But the prudence around the decision making with fulsome information is the most critical factor. And with the asset recycling bit, we take assets that are old or redundant, or in some cases have been empty for many years and have not been offered up. And you can swap those out for new and improved assets that actually deliver a lot more for the community in which they are placed.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you very much. I'm now going to cross to Councillor Cooper and then Councillor Mulholland.
Kia ora, everybody. I'm seeing a few questions coming through which do relate to the projects. First of all, what we did as a council, the Mayor said to the council-controlled organisations and the rest of the organisation, go away and tell us what you can defer. Tell us what you can put off and not. And so that's how we got the list. But in this feedback, if you think something's more important to keep, we do want to hear your priorities. That's Scott sending us that. You can actually tell us. It's really important that we hear our priorities. And I've heard a few things around our environmental targeted rate. Even though there will be about a $5 million deferral for track work and carry dieback research, we'll still be using this or spending the same amount of money in the whole 10-year plan. It won't be less money spent overall, but we'll just be deferring about 5 million of it for 1 year. That money won't go into the consolidated fund as such. That will be ring fenced. We will still spend that money. There'll be about 2.5 million, 2.6 million down on regional track work, and about 2.4 on local track work. However, it doesn't mean that we're stopping the track reopening project. We're going to keep going with it. It just means we'll defer that because we have to. And the comment there about environmental projects, please be assured we've not tried to target certain areas. We've gone right across the board. Every department, every CCO have had to look at everything they're doing. And, so that's really important. There was another question about water care that I'm happy to answer later. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper. I'm going to give the opportunity to Councillor Tracy now, and then I'll come to Shane. Unfortunately, I can't see him on the screen, but I'll give him an opportunity anyway. Councillor Mulholland.
Kia ora, thank you for the opportunity to speak. Good evening. Just with regards to the statements that have been made by the Deputy Mayor and Councillor Cooper, it is important to remember that your feedback on the principles of what you believe are important projects in your area are also shared, because those decisions have not been made. And whilst there is opportunity to bring some online at a later date. I am very mindful of some of the questions I've been asked already from community with regards to local projects that have been started. And my understanding is that those have been contracted. Where they can continue, they will continue because they have been contracted. And we need to be very mindful too on the basis that some of the questions I've been asked around when a project is near being signed and agreed as a tender process and contracted, that there is still some discussion to take place on those. So I believe one of the things that I would like to share that is important in returning an answer to that question is this is also about fairness and equity, and that balance does come in to the decision making around what may or may not occur. But we need to also know what sort of funding we have to deal with, because this is not the end of it, and we still have an economic situation and a crisis that we are facing. So until we know how much access we have in terms of funding, that impacts as well. So I think it's really important for those that are interested in the fairness and equity, and I say that especially given some projects in the FO area, but we must consider all and we must see those final numbers. So contracted makes a difference. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy. I'm just going to give an opportunity to Shane, if you'd like to say something, and then I'll cross back to Andrew and Linda, who'd like to address. There's a question there about water care and a second part to another question.
Kia ora, can you hear me, Eddie? I'm having some issues.
I can, you're all good.
No? Oh, great, fantastic. Hey, look, I just wanted to endorse the comments of my colleagues who I thought covered this very well. And just to add very clearly that we all decide this budget as Aucklanders, and a part of that is the consultation. The crucial part of that is what we're doing right now and over the next 3 weeks. So we've had a first stab, but we want to hear your feedback, and then we'll take that into account and go from there.
Thank you very much, Shane. I'm going to go back to Linda now before coming back to our SMEs.
Thank you. There's a question here that says, why is the 2.5% increase to both incoming water and wastewater being imposed at this post-COVID critical time? Just like the council, we need an income to operate. Water care does not get any money from council. It gets it from customers, as a lot of us are. And 2.5 helps meet their growth needs. It pays for the services. But what they have done is they've offered up $23 million of savings on capital projects. They will still have to do build the central interceptor, which is a very critical project that's been planned for many years and is already contracted to separate the stormwater and wastewater to clean up our harbour. And so they haven't got such a big amount of savings to offer up because they're doing one of the biggest projects we've seen. But 2.5% is smaller than what we're talking about. We're talking about either 3.5 or 2.5, but it really is. It actually runs the services. It pays the people that work at the treatment plant out at Mangere, Rosedale. It pays the contractors that come and fix many broken pipes we've had. Unfortunately, over the drought, the hard grounders squeeze those pipes and crack them up. All of those sorts of things need to go on, and that is a growth rates rise, just like our suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. I'm going to cross now to Andrew before posing a question to Bill.
Just picked up a couple of questions. There was a request. There was one question was looking at have we asked central government for assistance? So the central government has asked governments, departments and local governments across New Zealand for shovel-ready projects that they can invest in to try and stimulate the economy. The council's provided a broad list of those projects that we consider would fit those criteria in Auckland. We see those as being important to both supporting growth in Auckland, to getting business activity going again in the Auckland area. And if some of these are to proceed with government support, that would enable us to build on the list of activity that we've got already in the budget, but we can't rely on that, and so the budget's proceeded without those being included. I also noted a question someone had about our targeted rates, and there's preceding some other inquiries about the prioritisation of our environmental projects, and also the prioritisation of some of our savings activities, which I'll ask David to comment on next. But before we do that, our targeted rates are collected so that that money, in particular for the natural environment targeted rate and the water quality targeted rate, will be spent on those activities over a 10-year period. So if we defer some of our expenditure in those areas in this coming year, that money will still be collected and it will still be spent over that 10-year period. It's just making an adjustment to our cash flows. So, David, you want to talk about our process for prioritising and some of the things we've got on our plate for the savings and the environmental and the capital projects?
Sure. So the way that we have come up with some of the proposals for savings has been it's just been worked through by officers and recommended to councillors for inclusion in this draft consultation, or in this consultation document for our draft budget. In terms of the environmental area, if you look at over that group of activity, the impact is not actually as severe, I guess, as in other areas. But of course, everywhere across council spending, we've had a good look at what we are spending money on and what we can defer in the short term to get us through this challenging time. Programs such as pest eradication will be some of those will be deferred next year, so there are some impacts. I guess at the 3.5% rates increase level, those impacts will be lower, and it will be pretty much activity deferred. When you're getting down to a 2.5% rates increase, or potentially even lower rates increases, that's when we will see significant service cuts, and so that's when you will see some major impacts on projects across the remit of council activity.
And for those of you interested in a bit more detail and want to see it written down, there's quite some good material in the consultation document that I'm guessing many of you have already looked at. That's available on our website. And then for further detail, there's quite a lot more material also available on the supporting information. It provides a bit more of a breakdown of some of the things that are on the table in terms of our service level changes, asset recycling, and also some of the impacts on capital investment and the supporting information for those who are keen to get a bit more detail.
Thank you. I've got a quick comment from Linda, and then I want to ask this question to Bill and chip away at some of these questions.
Thank you. There was another question from Scott. You're sending a good lot of questions through, Scott. It was about, and I'm not sure if people can see on the screen the questions here, but I'll read it out just in case. And Scott was concerned that some countries are taking advantage of COVID-19 to roll back environmental protections and continue with extremely environmentally destructive practices, and what measures are in place to ensure this doesn't happen here. Well, for the moment, of course, the RMA as it currently is in place. However, the government has made some changes to assist its shovel-ready projects, and that will, which is out of our hands, that will create a board of experts, and my understanding is there may be somebody from that council area that will be able to be on that panel. But yes, they are taking a little bit of advantage maybe of doing that to get through these projects, but my understanding that Section 2 still applies, which is making sure that the purpose of the RMA still stands, which is the protection of the environment. So that's as much as I can tell you about that. But from our point of view, any resource consents we will be responding to applications will be going through the normal process. So we're not making any changes there.
Thank you. Bill, the question for you is there a plan for the coordination of which businesses should receive support?
Not really an area where council gets involved in, other than some rates deferment, as long as the rates bill's under 20,000. The government is the place where support for businesses potentially gets rolled out. We've already seen that with the subsidy around keeping people at the workplace, the 80% subsidy there. And we're seeing other things coming through and that are proposed to help companies move forward with easier capital and or loan restrictions or values uplifted and taken out. So council doesn't directly get out there and support businesses at all. It rolls more around providing the suitable infrastructure and services for business to operate in effectively. It's primarily a government responsibility.
Thank you, Bill. Tracy?
So just further, and thank you, Deputy Mayor, for that. But just a response to, in terms of my relationship with the business community, one thing I do want to share with people who may not be aware, we do have a business improvement district targeted rate, and I have been involved with a number of those during this lockdown period and moving forward. Those targeted rates do continue on the basis of the decisions by those organisations, and they did have an opportunity to reduce coming into the new fiscal period, so some have done that. But that funding does support the business community. They essentially pay into a fund to support their own local business community. Now, those business communities too have been seeking funding from government. They are, a number of them, sharing information with their membership around government funds, the 100K for those that require it, wage subsidies and so forth. So I totally agree with what the Deputy Mayor is saying, but just remembering that we do support the business community through the Business Improvement District policy, and that has been working well for a number of businesses, because I have had those responses from them, and it's great that they have the capacity and ability through us as a council to have a targeted rate. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy. I've got a question here that I might ask the Deputy Chair of the Finance Committee. Shane, have you any comment to make on what kind of a commitment, if possible, can be given to ensure that rates are spent on what they're meant to be spent on? And I've got an example here about Cody Dieback and getting the Waitaketas open.
Yeah. So the Cody Dieback program and track upgrades and things of the like being spent through the natural environment targeted rate that has already been passed. And when we're doing targeted rates, there is a legal requirement to collect that and then spend it on the purposes of your collection. So in other words, we've told the public we have to collect that for the environment, and then we have to spend that for the environment. So there is some safeguards there for that work, but at the same time, we'll need to be looking at when the timing is of that work as well. So I think that's a really key point of feedback. I'd really like you to feedback that through on what your views are in terms of how and when to spend that.
Thank you, Shane. I'm going to break from the questions for a moment and just do a quick fire with our panelists. What's the biggest opportunity presented here? Is there an opportunity? What is the greatest opportunity that this emergency budget poses for our communities should they get out there, make their submission and have their say? And I'm going to start with you, Tracy.
To a question from a member of the public who was asking who was here. I think they still do need clarity on that. So can I just answer that one, because I was actually just typing in the reply. Bobby, you asked the question about exactly who's here. So there is Deputy Mayor, Councillor Bill Cashmore, Councillor Cooper, Councillor Henderson and myself. So hopefully that, I know it has, we answered a little bit earlier and we were introduced, but hopefully that does answer your question. So apologies, Eddie, because I was in the middle of responding to that question, and also the answer to Sandra Coney. Nice to have you on board, Sandra. and of course in the role you play in community. So you mentioned a question about changes from 20 to 5 mil with climate change. I'm sorry, I wasn't responding to that question. I was talking about the business targeted rate. So yes, I'm not sure exactly if you want to change that question, maybe because I'm not able to respond to that because I was referring to the targeted rate for business. Sorry, Eddie, if you would like to then repeat that, please, for me.
No worries. Coming back to our question this evening, what's the biggest opportunity that the emergency budget consultation presents our communities?
Well, the biggest opportunity, and I'm paying for advertising myself and I'm putting it out there on social media and doing boosting and all sorts of things, the biggest opportunity is for you to actually have your say so that we, as your governing body, as Auckland councillors, can, alongside our local boards, hear what you have to say and put that up for discussion, because it is a really united team. And that's what I really like about being a councillor here, is that we do work together, we do share, and we do debate information. So I think the opportunity for you is being able to share your views, share your opinions, know that we're inclusive. And also the other opportunity that it is for you is to actually say what you don't like and what you don't want to see. And we've got a lot of highly competent, capable people who know what they need in their communities. So I think that's another great opportunity, Eddie, and for those that are listening, to have that chance. And one thing I'd like to say is, as I have been repeating since I got involved and became a councillor, is I do want to hear what you have to say, because I will be sharing that with other councillors, and I will be confident because I have heard from you. So I hope that answers fairly clearly on my views on that.
Thank you. Linda Cooper, any thoughts about the opportunities that this budget consultation presents our communities?
I think to answer that, I have to go back to what has brought us to an emergency budget. And I think that being in a state of a national emergency, learning to communicate in different ways, actually having to really reflect on our lives and what's really important, particularly probably our families, really. And I think that the opportunity here is that I hope that people will become more engaged, because this is unprecedented. And when you have something like this, it's an emergency, it's really different, it's scary, it's all of the things that it's not business as usual. And I think when things are business as usual, we tend to just go, oh, that I can't make any difference. It's going to happen anyway. Whereas when we're really having to refine down and find what's really important to people, and that's why we want to hear from you, when you're on a slimmer budget and you really have to pare it down to what is important to me, it makes you really think. And that's what I hope the opportunity is, that more people will let us know. It makes our job harder, but that's good. We'll work for our money, and I think that's really important. We need to hear what you've got to say. I hope that the opportunity is that we become closer. There's less of a gulf between decision makers and residents of Auckland, and that you take this opportunity to tell us what you want, what is important to you. So that's what I like to see out of this, and I think out of this time that we've gone through as a region, hopefully we become closer and communicate better.
Whaftai, before I give the opportunity to Shane, Councillor Cooper, I just want to ask a supplementary question related to that. We're all really, really extensively involved in our communities, and we want them to get involved because we absolutely want to hear from them. There is a sentiment out there that we'll go ahead and make the decision anyway. We get on the engagement, we get thousands of submissions, but it kind of doesn't really matter, is what I tend to hear. And I really like that commitment that you just made. You do look forward to seeing these submissions. You do look forward to reading from the people. I just wondered if you wanted to re-emphasize that, because I think that's really, really important.
Whaftai lava, Eddie. I think the thing about consultation is, people look at it differently. Some see it as a direction. I said this, you must do it. We hear from a lot of people. At the end of the day, we have to sit in the hot seat and make the decisions, and it won't always please everybody, but we have to take into account what people say, quite often we'll get that feedback and we'll go, actually, maybe we could do that differently, or maybe that's more important, but now we'll cut something else instead. That can often happen as well. But I think contrary to, I can understand why people think, oh, they don't listen. We do. We take it really seriously. But we can't always do exactly what you propose, though we would like to, because there still will be constraints financially, and sometimes practically in the implementation of some of the ideas doesn't work either. And so it's our job to kind of, and with the help of our great staff, to put that all together and to go, well, there's some of this actually we could do, some of this we can't because of this or that. And sometimes it's really complex. And I think as a councillor, you explain things to people and you can see their eyes glaze over because it is technical. And that's why we do the job, because we kind of, we're used to it. But sometimes it's not a simple answer, but quite often what you do say, it really does make a difference, and it does change our approach. It might not stop something, but it might change how we do it or when we do it. And so over the years that I've been a councillor, off and on for quite a long time, I have been in situations where we've all kind of knocked back on our heels and gone, actually, that's a really good idea. Or actually what we thought was important wasn't so important. This other thing is. So I really think it's worth putting your ideas in, because often it will turn us around and we'll change something or we'll add something in.
Whawhate lava, Linda. Shane, any thoughts from you?
Thanks, Eddie, and yeah, thanks to everyone tuning in. Yeah, look, I think it's a reminder of what people really value and what people really want out of their council going forward. So I think in terms of opportunities, then that is the opportunity to go to Aucklanders and say, look, what's actually important to you? What have we taken as the general done thing and the general done practice, and how can we actually do that better and meet needs a bit better? It's important to remember how we got here in the first place, and that people are still doing it tough, both before COVID and because of COVID. So I think now is our chance to try and reassess this and to try and help those that really need it. Just lastly, in terms of an opportunity, I think when we're looking in the future, and I've seen a few questions about this too, looking at climate change and our city's resilience for future economic shocks. Because I'm telling you right now, this won't be the last time that we're going to have economic tough situations, and climate change looms large over our communities, and the results could be really tough for us. So this is a chance for us to do things better and to actually build some resilience into our city so that people can continue to enjoy it. Thank you.
Whawhate, Shane. I'll come across to you, Bill, for any comments or thoughts from you, and then I'll come back to Linda.
Thanks, Eddie, and for the audience out there. This crisis is showing up all sorts of changes in behaviour, isn't it? I don't travel to work at 4 o'clock in the morning anymore, unless I actually have to. I'm doing more of my work via these types of mediums. And I'm interested to know how many people are changing their lives around. How many more people are working from home? How many more people are changing the way they commute, changing the way they run businesses, and changing their lives around? How many more people are closer to their community than what they were pre-COVID? How many more people are closer to their neighbours? There's comments that make people out, walking in the parks and jogging and cycling. That's fantastic stuff. That's great news. Is it going to carry on, in your views, once we go back through level 1 and then back out to freedom at the other end of that? Or will we change, or will we revert back to our old habits? I see this crisis as an opportunity to look fundamentally at what we do. What's important to us as individuals, as families, and as communities? And what can we do to make a difference? One of the great things about, I loved about last year's budget was the 2 targeted rates, the water quality targeted rate and the environmental targeted rate. And there's a bit of political skepticism around those 2 proposals when they were first put up. But what came back fundamentally from the consultation we had was the public supported it hugely. They wanted to see money put into these jails to deliver these projects, to deliver things that made the environment better, to deliver the central interceptor, to deliver the water quality improvements over a 10-year period. And that to me is a critical factor that we need to look at. What do we need to do that you, the public, want, that you see as important to your area? And then as Linda says, and as Tracy says, and as Shane exhibits all the time, we will sit down and we'll discuss it. We'll be pragmatic, we'll be sensible, but we will have to make those hard decisions. What we've got now is a blip in time of a bit of fear and a big hit on the finances right across the board. And everyone's taking a bit of pain. I'm seeing a question here about salaries. I'll come to that in a tick. But we have to pull the handbrake on our activities so we remain financially viable. It's that simple. To do anything else would be reckless. So to remain financially stable, to keep the economy within Auckland moving, to deliver some of the infrastructure that we were going to do, yes, we'll have to defer some, but we need to keep enough stuff going for the needs of the communities and the public. So yes, there will be some pain, but there will still be things being delivered. And we can, as we come out of COVID, as the economy starts to grow again, we can deliver more and more and catch up. I think one of the other interesting points is we've tried to lead from the front. You know, the mayor's announced he has taken a salary cut. I've done the same. I think every member of our ELT and senior staff has also done the same. A lot of councillors have done the same. And we're asking our staff to forgo not only just their pay increase that was negotiated for this year, saying that's not going to happen, but are you willing to sacrifice up 5 or 10%? And not everyone can do that. Not everyone's in a position to do that. But those that can, we've seen great results from Auckland Transport. They are picking it up. And I think that's a great sense of the feeling that our staff have to the running of this city. So yes, people are doing what they can, where they can, and how they can. And that is probably the great positive that's come out of this situation. Thanks, Eddie.
Whawhate lava bill, and to all our elected members who have taken the time to carefully and thoughtfully respond to these opportunities and these questions. I'm going to now cross to Linda, who would like to share something. Then we'll go to our SMEs, our subject matter experts, who'd like to get in and address a few of these questions. Whawhate, Linda?
Yeah, there's a question here around leveraging off the fact that so many people have been out. Now, I'm a great walker and cycler, but I have seen so many people out with their families during lockdown because there wasn't much else to do. We weren't in our cars, and so our parks, even though we weren't using our equipment, people were out there walking, using our footpaths, our shared paths, our tracks, much more than we normally would because they've been at home. And this question talks about how do we leverage that? Well, as Bill said, there will be reductions in maintenance. There will be reductions maybe in things like park mowing. But just remembering, this is going to be deferred for a year. So our plan is that any slowdown in maintenance or projects will be for a year. That's the plan. That's what we're hoping for the best. And we do want to encourage people to keep those exercise regimes up, being out with your family. What's been great to see is mums and dads, grandmas, aunties, uncles, taking the kids out and actually spending more time together. And those things are free for people to use. And so those are really important. That's the second biggest fund that we spend after transport is our parks and our recreation. And that is really critical to people. We know how important it is to people. So if that's very important to you, please let us know. Tell us if, you know, there's particular parks, there's particular things about parks. So we dog walkers as well that use parks and don't like the lawns to be long because in the winter it makes their dogs' tummies all wet, I've been told. But there's a lot of things like that that are really important. Everybody's got their own individual way of using our facilities, enjoying them. And yes, we will have to defer some maintenance, some projects, but it will be for a year. But if you feel that you just can't bear that to happen, even for 1 year, please let us know. If we get enough people telling us, that could change that direction.
Whawhate, Linda. Now cross back to our SMEs.
With the voluntary salary reductions we've asked staff to make. I can let you know that over 600 staff have taken up that request, and it's got a saving so far of over $2 million per annum, or over the time period, sorry, the 6-month pay cut time period. The management's also extended that to give people a bit more opportunity a bit more time to think about it, and to extend the opportunity to make that contribution. And in the staff front, you'll be aware that from some of the savings we've talked about, there's also likely to be, unfortunately, there could be some job changes, some job reductions. That's part of some of the savings that are proposed. I would again encourage you to have a look at some of the materials that have been provided to support the consultation, to help you look at what we're proposing, so that you can deliver your feedback with the best information available to you. So do have a look at our consultation document and the supporting material for those with more of an appetite for detail. Gives you a good background on the choices that the councillors have put in front of you and the decisions that they'll have to make in July, both about where our more limited capital investment can go and what things we should hold back on, at what areas we should be looking at making savings in, and adjustments to the level of service we provide, and also the sorts of assets we look to recycle. And I think David made a key point earlier, I don't know if he didn't, he can make it now, about some of these assets being in the community space and not particularly well used. And this gives us a stimulus to look at how we use those and how to get the best out of the investment we make in providing community facility services. David?
Yeah, so in terms of asset recycling, so of course it's not a new thing. Since amalgamation, Auckland Council has been doing asset recycling since it started. So it's important that to recognise that in the community there are some assets that aren't performing as well as others, that aren't utilised as well as others, and Auckland has quite a lot of assets which are actually not really contributing that much to service. So for the council, we can sell those assets and then reinvest the proceeds into assets that actually make more sense in terms of being fit for community and optimising what's needed in the community. So assets such as Te Manawa, for example, in the west, are a good example of a mixed-use community facility that is optimised, that's optimised in terms of the way the community uses that. So I guess looking over the next year, there are more opportunities to have a look at assets that potentially we can sell. We do have a list of potential assets that might be considered. Some of those have been considered before by councillors as part of the Panuku property portfolio. So that list can be found in the supporting information to the consultation material. So I encourage people to have a look at those.
Before I go across to Linda Cooper, David, I'd like to ask a follow-up question, and this is probably one that I'd like answered myself as well. What does asset recycling actually mean? Aren't you just selling old ones and buying new ones? David, would you like to make a comment to that question, please?
Well, I suppose when you think of asset recycling, it is selling assets, but the whole idea around recycling is you then reinvest the proceeds from those sales into assets that make more sense in terms of what the community needs, but also are more cost effective too. So it's the idea that you're not just selling assets for the sake of selling assets, you're selling assets to reinvest in better performing assets or in services that make more sense in terms of what the community needs or want.
Indeed, if these are underutilised assets, then the investments... If these are underutilised assets, they're not necessarily delivering the most value to the most members of the community. And if, as David puts it, we can put that investment into things that are going to get better used, then we are getting a better return on the ratepayers' money in terms of the outcomes for the community members. And this has to be looked at pretty carefully. There's quite an extensive list of assets that the council can look at in this space in the supporting information. There's a few things where the council has already made decisions to sell the assets, but there's quite a number of others where they have to go through giving some thought to that process.
Thank you. Linda.
Yeah, I guess being just a plain Westie girl, I'll try and put it in plain language. And how I think about asset sales or recycling, whatever you want to call it, I think about it. So, for example, you own a house, or maybe your first home, it might be a little 2-bedroom, and your family gets bigger, and you say, well, this isn't big enough for us now. We need bigger. We've got a growing family. We've got this happening. We want to be closer to a different school, you know, something like that. And we go, okay, we sell that and we buy another house that suits our needs better. And then as we get older, we go, well, the kids are grown up now. I'll sell that. We're going to buy something smaller, and then I'm going to invest the money somewhere else. And I think the types of things, none of this would what we call strategic assets, which are huge hunks of land or special buildings that we enjoy. They're more things like Auckland Transport might have what you call a paper road. So they've got some land. It's sort of a road width wide, not big enough to build, you know, to do anything with. But then they've decided that the road network that they want to build doesn't need that bit anymore. So they'll go to the parks people, they'll go to all the other CCOs, and they'll say, do you need this? And they'll look at it and they go, no. And we can sell that piece of land. And sometimes you might sell it stripped down the middle, half of it to one land, you know, householder, and half to another who are quite happy to make their section a bit bigger, and they get sold for a market price. And then that money can go back into our pot to buy more land for maybe parks. It helps build a new building, maybe a new library. And so that's when that's the recycling, I guess. It's that you're using that money to get us another asset, build us another asset, buy some more land for a park or some roads, something like that. And sometimes you'll have, in the old days, we used to have a thing called reserve contribution. And I know in McLaren Park area, there's some funny little bits of land which are really dreadful, steep things that you could never put a park on, and we have to spend a lot of money mowing them every year. And in actual fact, someone might want to incorporate that into their house next door. We can't really have any use for it, and we get that money, it goes back in the pot. But clearly that money is not used for, it's not used to pay the bills. It's not what we call operational, everyday, paying the staff or anything like that. The money comes from an asset and it goes back to assets. So it's not lost to us. It's not like selling the crown jewels, like selling your house to pay the bills. It's to buy another house, if you use that household analogy, or if your car's too small and then you get a bigger family, you need a van. You just move that money into a different asset.
Thank you, Linda. I've got a question here before I come back to our SMEs that I wonder if Councillors Cashmore and Henderson might care to comment on. And the question/comment here is, good to hear climate change is being considered here. Now have another look at other projects which are being deferred. Climate change isn't being deferred. Will you now look at some of these projects with a climate lens? I wonder if I can start with you, Bill.
Thanks, Eddie, and thank you for the question. It's a jolly good one because, you know, one thing we're seeing the viciousness of this drought that we're facing is this going to be the new norm or partially of the new norm? So definitely climate change lens has to run across everything that we do. And just as climate change is coming up on us, but it's not all coming up on us tomorrow. But it is something we have to bear in mind, we have to account for, and we have to be prepared for. And we have to increase the delivery of some projects potentially over the next 10 years because of climate change. And one of those might be, what are we going to do to ensure the security of Auckland's water supply? And is that going to create a capital investment? What are we going to do to protect as much of our coastline as is feasible to protect from sea rise or storm surge? Those decisions have to be made with a climate change lens and the budget allocated accordingly. And that's going to be for future consultations and future challenges financially. This particular budget is not ignoring climate change. Some things have been deferred for a year, potentially two, hopefully not. But it's still very much a focus for this council, and we take it very seriously. Thanks, Eddie.
Thank you very much, Bill. Shane, have you any thoughts?
Yeah, thanks, Eddie. Yeah, look, it's a great question. Yeah, thanks for that. Look, climate change, we talk about it as if it's coming, but actually it's already here. We're looking at things like the water crisis at the moment, but even the flooding that happened a couple of years ago, you know, I could list examples all night, but this is an urgent situation that needs to be sorted. So will we look at it again with a climate lens? Yes, we will. And I think a key part of that is to encourage people to submit on the sort of specifics they want us to look at. And just to back up the Deputy Mayor, that in a lot of cases, yes, we're looking at things that might be able to be deferred and put off until for a year or 2 year or things like that. But I take the premise of the question very seriously, and yes, we will be looking at it from a climate lens, and we'd encourage your submissions through. Thank you.
Thank you, Shane. Just before we come back to our SMEs, I have a question. Well, it's a comment really about our rural communities appreciating this platform and the opportunity for them to be engaged. What I can say is that, you know, we aim to be as inclusive as possible and appreciate the challenges that this can pose for Aucklanders and rural communities. And going forward, what I can say is that we're committed to providing online meeting opportunities to you two going forward. And I hope that that's probably the only question that I can answer. And if I've spoken out of turn, then you won't see me on Tuesday presenting this webinar. I hand now over to our SMEs.
Hi, I noticed another question about the asset recycling. Please do have a look on page 48 of the supporting information. There's quite a thorough discussion there of the asset recycling, how the council's thinking about it, what some of the assets or types of assets consideration might be given to. I also noted another question about creative with social procurement and cross-council project delivery. Not 100% sure what part of that means, but I can certainly say that some of the cost savings we're looking to make are to reduce duplication of services between the council and some of our CCOs to make sure some of our back office services aren't being duplicated. And to repeat, some of our future investments in community facilities are looking at bringing together our community centres and libraries and other facilities so that we get the benefit of being able to draw people to one place, but also some scale in terms of the delivery of those services and the construction of buildings, etc.
Thank you, Andrew. In the interest of time, and this has been quite an informative session, and again, I thank all of you, our members of our audience or our community this evening who have taken the time to not only tune in but ask questions of our subject matter experts and also the elected members that we have this evening. I just want to remind you that this is not the only webinar, and tonight's webinar is obviously West focused, but obviously as the regional questions come up, we'll address those as well. The same way that you would have registered for tonight's webinar is the same way that you can register for the other ones with varying focus areas. What I do want to do now is again just do a quick fire with our panelists, especially our elected members, in terms of some reflections on not only tonight's kōrero, but again another plug for why this submission, this emergency budget consultation is important. And I'll start with you, Shane, if that's okay, and you're still with us.
Yeah, cheers, Eddie. Thanks for the opportunity. Yeah, look, it's been great to hear the questions and comments from the public, and I'm excited over the next 3 weeks to hear more and more and more, because the more people feed in, the better the results are going out. I really believe that. And so the chance to hear from you and what you value is crucially important. And so I just thank everybody for taking that time. And also thank everybody on this call for taking your time as well. Yeah, we're shaping the future of our city, and it's an interesting moment in time for Auckland. And it's important that you feed back in. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Shane. Councillor Cooper, any reflections or final thoughts on tonight's webinar?
Yeah, well, it's certainly been an interesting exercise, and I think, as Bill said, we can do more of this. I think that we don't have to rely on jumping in our cars to get to places, and I know that, I think I know who asked the question around rural streaming, Bobby. she's been asking that for a long time, and I think she's absolutely right. I think that tonight's been an example of what we can do remotely. It means that you know, you can still be at home with the kids. You don't have to come out in the cold weather to a cold old hall, and you can actually engage with us. And also, please, if you don't feel comfortable in talking to us this way, you know, go on the website, send us emails. It does get to us. We see all our emails. We can send answers to you. I really appreciate that people have come on this webinar. I think it's been a really good thing to do. It's the first one, and thanks to Eddie, he's done a good job, and our subject matter experts have been really great to always have the backup of our staff who know all the numbers. So yeah, it's been really good to do it this way. I think we should do this more, and I'd love to see some of our local board meetings being streamed like this as well. Good night, everybody. Ka kite.
Thank you very much, Councillor Cooper. Councillor Mulholland.
Lovely. Thank you for the opportunity. I find this a great way to get different views and opinions, and it's really lovely to see some people that I know of too who are here online, and I do think it is a really fabulous way. I'm surprised it's not done anyway, to be fair. I said that to the IT guys, oh, isn't this normally done? Because people that know me know I'm a big social media user, and I do love to get that feedback via videos. It's always great to have the opportunity to listen to people and to hear what they have to say. I have been replying to some of the questions as we move forward, so please also, as has been mentioned, please take the opportunity to feed into social media platforms of all councillors and back to council to request information of us so that we can share that with the subject matter experts, as Eddie has said, because you do have the right to those answers. It's also great to see people's interest in what's happening in your community and having a love for tamaki makaurau, because that's the most important thing, is we do work together, because together I think we are better. And it's also good to see that the information is going out with regards to consultation and actually talking about that together we are better. And I really believe with your input that we can have a pathway forward, because this is not our individual decision making, this is your decision making. So encourage others too. I'd like to suggest, please encourage others to participate. And for those that are local board members that are on here, thank you for your contribution to the consultation document through the emergency committee. And I want to acknowledge our Deputy of Finance who's here for allowing chairs and local board members to input through that process for them to participate. So ka kite, and it's fabulous to share with you. Love the forum and the feedback. I have read every single question. Kia ora.
Whawhataitele, Tracy. Before I cross to Bill for our final word this evening from our panellists, our subject matter experts, any final contributions from you?
So COVID-19's had a major health and economic impact, sorry. Big economic impact on the council with major effects on our revenue. You can see from I presume you've still got this screen up, it's showing you the options that are in front of the councillors that we want your feedback on. Some small changes there in terms of the rates. We recognise that ratepayers, many may be struggling. The changes we're talking about here are at the margins, $1.30, $1.80 a week, but depending on where the councillors head with this, they can have a material impact on the services that are delivered to the community and the amount of investment that the council can make in the community, which both has benefits in terms of the assets to deliver services, but also in the employment and economic stimulation that creates for the city. So have a think about those things. Do read our supporting materials and consultation document. They'll provide you with a good background on the issues and help inform your views, which we look forward to getting. Thank you very much.
Half-day tele, and across to you now, please, Bill.
Kia ora, Eddie, and thank you to our councillors, local board members, and to our great staff who participated to make this evening, the inaugural webinar, I think a good success. There's one question that hasn't been answered I've come seeing through on the conversation piece, and that was about social procurement. And to whoever the person asked that question, last term of council, we introduced social procurement as a key component of how we purchase goods and services. And what astounded me as chair of that strategic improvement committee last term was seeing the uptake by the private business sector, working to find people who are disadvantaged, working to get people who have been long-term unemployed, employed, working with groups and community advocates to get better outcomes for people who are disadvantaged. And it's really become quite a catchphrase in the community of business. Let's do good for more people rather than just look after those within. And it's becoming, I think, a social platform that virtually all businesses in New Zealand are buying into, and it's a great thing to see. So thank you for that question. It's a very important component of what we are trying to do. Eddie, to you and the team, well done this evening. It's never easy doing something for the first time. As you say, the wheels can come off or just get a bit wobbly, can make things difficult. It's been held together really well, so thank you. To the people who've been involved, our Aucklanders, particularly our Aucklanders from out west. It's a great city we have, and it can be better still. But we need you all to help us try and deliver that. There's not one person who sits at a local board or at a council table who's doing it because they just want to be at the table. They do it because they believe in their community. They do it because they have a passion for seeing good society, for seeing good, healthy, clean infrastructure, and for seeing a strong economy going forward. Yes, we've had a hit with COVID. We come out of it as the nation with our health pretty well intact. My sympathy goes to those people who have lost family members to this terrible disease and to those who have been afflicted by it. But by and large, we've come out of it better than most. What we have to do now is to ensure that our economy comes out of it as quickly and better than most. And to that end, I'd like to thank everyone involved. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for your participation. It's been a good positive start. And together we really need to do this and do it well. Thanks, Eddie.
Whaftai tele, Bill, and to all of our panellists this evening. To our community, what I've heard from our elected members is a resounding commitment to keeping those communication channels open so that our elected members hear you and value with authenticity the contributions that you have to make in co-constructing our way forward. He aha te mea nui o te ao, he tangata, he tangata, he tangata. We can and we will together with our people. Finally, there are questions that we have not been able to address this evening. They'll be uploaded to the website. There'll be a live document and we'll add those there along with the transcript and a recording of tonight's webinar for you. Thank you so much for taking the time to tune in, and all of our team that have hand in hand helped us make this happen. Pō Mārie, tō whāsoifua.